We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
China on America's doorstep. That's the potential issue facing the U.S., courtesy of new plans to build a Chinese facility on the coast of Cuba, just 100 miles from American borders. Now, to discuss the implications of this, what the administration is doing, if anything, we're joined by Liberty Nation's national security correspondent, former U.S. Air Force pilot, and former Principal Deputy Undersecretary of Defense Controller, Mr. Dave Patterson. Dave, thanks for being here.
Mark, happy to be with you, always.
So, Dave, China in Cuba, strategically, is this a good thing for America or not? Well, I know the answer, right? But why specifically is it such a bad thing?
Well, strategically and tactically, it's a bad idea. I mean, and the only reason that the Chinese feel emboldened to do this is because they have no pushback. They see that the Biden administration has demonstrated an unwillingness to take them on, either publicly or behind the scenes. Most recently, our Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, was snubbed at the beginning of June at the Shangri-La dialogue when the Minister of Defense of China, Li Shangfu, just basically said, no, we're not going to talk about military-to-military talks. And so you get a background that where China isn't persuaded by the United States to do anything that would be either mutually beneficial or to give a nod to the U.S. in any way. The new revelation recently revealed in, I believe, the Wall Street Journal this morning that China is in discussion with Cuba on building a joint training base in Cuba, which will, of course, involve hundreds of Chinese coming in to do that. That's troubling. I mean, it's 100 miles, as you said, from the United States. But it should be expected.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's really the takeaway from it, is that whatever China wants to do, it can do, because there is no significant pushback. And I mean, it seems to me, and I do have quite a lengthy and full experience with China. I lived there for many years. But it seems to me that the real win here is not that there's a military base going to be, well, essentially that's what it is, a training facility for military. So it's a military base just off the coast of America. The big win here is the propaganda win, isn't it? Because, China can say to its people, you think America's this big, strong power. Look, we're putting our soldiers, we're putting our equipment, our weaponry, even our missiles. Who's going to stop them if they put missiles there? On the doorstep of America, and they're not doing anything about it. This is how strong we are, and that's how weak America is. It's a big propaganda win back home, isn't it?
Absolutely. And they have a target audience that they're talking to, the non-aligned nations, those nations who might favor China in trade. That's who they're talking to. And they're winning the propaganda war. There's no question about that. Again, General Li Shangfu had 35 minutes to talk to the group at the Shangri-La dialogue, and he just excoriated the United States in every possible way with propaganda that was just ridiculously inaccurate. Have you ever heard that Lloyd Austin talked at the Shangri-La dialogues?
No.
I mean, we don't understand that this is, in fact, a Cold War, just like it was with the Soviet Union, and we need to behave similarly. And of course, we know how that worked out for us. And so why wouldn't it work out similarly for the United States with China? It's not significantly different, other than you have a much greater economic prowess. But then, think back, and during the Cold War, the Soviet Union was a fairly strong economic power in and of itself. It kind of imploded, but other than, in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, they were a powerhouse to be reckoned with.
Well, I think a lot of people are, at least in the backs of their minds, are thinking about the similarities to the Cold War situation, and specifically the missile crisis, because obviously you had Russia essentially using Cuba to further, well, sorry, the Soviet Union using Cuba to further the Soviet Union's aims, and to be pushing the buttons of America by, the warships, and being in such close quarters and such a threat. And really that shaped very much the American psyche during the period, with stop, drop, and cover, hide under the desks when the missiles come. Are they trying to mentally break the American public?
I think they're trying to put the American public and the current administration just simply off their game, and they're succeeding, I might add.
Yeah.
Whenever you'll notice that in public statements, some of the first phrases they use is we're not in a Cold War mentality. We're not bringing back the Cold War way of thinking. And they say this over and over and over. And when they say something, that means, well, yeah, we are. We are in a Cold War. And of course, if you dissuade us from thinking that way, then we'll be less prepared mentally to deal with them. And that's what they're trying to do. And I mean, this is all part of their plan. And they've got another plan that Cuba fits right into, Project 141. They're trying to surround the United States with facilities and places where they can be a presence. Not long ago, Gordon Chang, an expert on China, pointed out that a Chinese company was building a deep water port in the Bahamas. And everybody says, oh, yeah, look, a deep water port in Bahamas, duh. Well, and now you've got a facility going.
Just to make this very clear, fancy yachts don't require a deep water port, right? We're talking.
Yes, I've been told that, and fishing boats, but they're also doing the same thing in Djibouti. They're also doing the same thing in the United Arab Emirates. Everywhere you look, there are Chinese people present doing things that are not in the United States' best interest. Not long ago, they took out an agreement for Canton Island in the Pacific. It has a real long runway. We used to have a naval base there, but now it's going to be Chinese. Well, this is ridiculous. And I might add that most of this has happened during this administration and not previous administrations.
So I think the big question is, Dave, is why is the Biden administration so hesitant to engage in let's call it a strong diplomacy? Now, Donald Trump, for all of his faults, I'm not entirely sure he achieved very much other than winning the propaganda victory against China. He was always talking about, we got to go after China. China are doing this, China are doing that. But it's a completely stark difference under the Biden administration. I'm wondering if, in terms of how the American people see the situation now, if it's just been cast away as, well, we don't really care what the American people think of the situation because, the adults are back in charge. And if China wants to do this, well, they can. It just seems a complete jetsoning of responsibility.
It's a fundamental foreign policy philosophy that the current administration has. And it's emblematic of the notion that, oh, if we be really nice to you, will you be nice to us, please? And it may sound silly, but when you start to unpack the way in which they approach our enemies, that's precisely their attitude. If we're nice to you, Iran, will you be nice to us? If we try to engage in behind the scenes, very quiet negotiations to get back to the failed nuclear treaty or nuclear agreement, will you be nice to us? It has never worked in the history of the foreign policy. That approach has never worked.
It's feeding the alligator in the hopes that it will eat you last. Dave Patterson, thank you ever so much for joining us.
Hey, Mark, thank you. Enjoyed talking with you.
And that's about all we have time for on Liberty Nation Radio here on the Radio American Network this week. My thanks to our guests, Scott DeCosenza and Dave Patterson, and to you, the listeners at home. A final thought for you. Winston Churchill once said, "The price of greatness is responsibility." And it seems to me that nowadays, not too many people are willing to pay that particularly high cost. Thanks for listening. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Don't get caught up in the media madness. Join our movement for free thinking and free speech at libertynation.com. Publishing news and analysis 24/7 with original articles by our team of authors who tell it like it is. Join us each week for online TV shows, The Uprising Podcast, and Liberty Nation Radio. We believe in free thinking and free speech. We are libertynation.com.